Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I want to talk for a few minutes at the beginning of my remarks about what's the response has been in our state, in the state of Missouri, to flooding. I was in St. Louis County with Congresswoman Wagner on Saturday. I was in St. Charles County the week before that. I was in Cape Girardeau following up on the work that Congressman Smith has done there. I was at St. Genevieve and Perryville and Cassville and Monette. And if you know anything about the geography of our state, those are all places that spread pretty far apart. But we had a flooding situation that was almost totally generated in our state, different than the floods we normally deal with, and the communities reacted with very little time in an impressive way. The Corps of Engineers also was there to help, the National Guard there to do what they needed to do, and now we see FEMA and SBA stepping in to see who qualifies for what kind of assistance, but there was loss of life. More often than not, Mr. President, the loss of life was somebody drove around a sign that says don't pass this sign and then got caught in a situation that they didn't anticipate, thought was less than it turned out to be. And so some families clearly are grieving that loss of life. We had 5 international soldiers that lost their life near Fort Leonard Wood, who maybe the whole idea of a low water bridge that you and I would be used to was something they hadn't thought about. We had 3 interstate highways closed, Interstate 55, Interstate 70, and Interstate 44, not all at exactly the same time, but all for somewhere in the 24 to 36 hour time frame, and we have to look at that and determine what we can do to be sure people don't needlessly lose access to where their kids are, where their job is, where health care is, and then just the economic impact of that interstate system that comes together in so many ways. In Missouri, shutting down was something that clearly, once we get beyond the immediacy of dealing with the flood itself, we need to look and see how we can prevent that problem from happening again. I don't know of a time when any 2 of those highways were ever closed at the same time before, but I know that Interstate 70 and Interstate 44 were closed at the same time. That has a real impact on people traveling east to west, or economic things happening east to west anywhere in the country. I also was able to talk about some good news, and I'm not sure how much good news we're going to hear over the next few days, but certainly the good news of stepping up and looking at healthcare research and the impact it can have in the country, things that are beginning to happen in mental health, and things that we're trying to do to respond to prescription drug abuse that becomes opioid abuse in all areas. In healthcare research, the National Institute of Health hadn't had an increase in their research funding since 2003. There was an effort made right before that to make a substantial increase, and the case is so easily made. The fact that the Congress stopped and the administration stopped has always been very frustrating to me, but we were able to see an increase this year for the first time in 12 years. Now, that meant you had to create a priority. For too many people in government, anything anybody wants to do is a priority. When there's a discussion, we have to fund our priorities. A lot of our colleagues hear that, meaning that, well, that means that we have to fund anything anybody has ever convinced the government, for no matter how short a period of time, that the government should put on the list of things we're interested in. Being interested in something doesn't make it a priority. It just makes it something that if everything else was going the right way, maybe this is somewhere you should look. But to fund NIH at a new level, we totally eliminated 18 programs, zeroed them out, didn't eliminate the authorization for them, just eliminated the money to run those 18 programs that the Congress accepted the argument and the president eventually accepted the argument that for the greater good, these 18 things don't need to continue to be done. The president asked for 23 new programs that didn't get funded either, but that allowed us to make a commitment to really set a priority. Now, why would you want to set a priority? And by the way, the increase was, first increase in 12 years was almost 7%. It was 6.6%. We went from $30 billion that was being spent on healthcare research last year to $32 billion this year. And hopefully this is the first step toward trying to solve healthcare problems with all the things that are changing in healthcare, everything from smartphone technology to individual medicine, now that we know what we know about the human genome. And how do we find that out? We found that out through NIH research. If we hadn't had NIH research, it's unlikely that the human genome would not be something we understand, but something still a mystery to us. It was a mystery to us for all of people's existence on the planet until just a few years ago. And the only reason that happened was the National Institute of Health and the Congress decided it's going to be helpful if we can figure out how all of us are different from each other, which also means now we're trying to figure out how a different approach to a disease, a different approach to cancer, a different approach to Alzheimer's, a different approach to heart disease would make a difference. And what difference does it make? What is sort of the priority of why you'd want to spend taxpayers' money in this way? One is the clear impact that healthcare research is having every day on individuals and families that aren't dealing with problems that 10 years ago they would have been dealing with. And what do we do moving forward for people at first priority? Let's see if we can find things that meet the challenge of a healthcare challenge. For their families that become their support group and their caregivers, let's see what we can do there. But for taxpayers generally, even if you weren't the individual beneficiary of this, the estimates are that the Medicare system will be absolutely overwhelmed between now and 2050 by things like Alzheimer's, things like cancer. If you can figure out a cure, if you could delay onset of Alzheimer's by 5 or 7 years on average, the unbelievable impact that would have on the cost of that devastating disease, both the real cost to taxpayers and the emotional and psychological cost to everybody involved, pretty overwhelming. But the Medicare system won't stand the projections that we now have of how much money would be spent if we don't find ways to deal with these new challenges. As people get older, Alzheimer's and cancer are more likely to end life than heart and stroke. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't still need to be focused on the neurological research or on heart research. All of those things are important, and a relatively small investment by the terms of what the federal government spends on health care, a relatively small investment to try to do something about that matters. And also, I think it's generally understood that health care is going to dramatically change in the next 10 years, the next 20 years. Where the research is done is likely to be where the jobs and the economic impact of that research occurs. I don't want to be going to the Chinese 10 years from now and say, will you tell us how your investment on research paid off? Because we're better at this than anybody else in the world, and we need to continue to be better. There are reasons for us to be better, and I visited some of the places where those reasons occur. I was at the Siteman Center on the campus of Washington University, one of the premier cancer-focused centers in the country. Washington University, by the way, is where a third of all the research was done to understand the human genome. So 1/3 of that activity was done right there on that campus. But meeting with the Alzheimer's Association, meeting with the American Cancer Association, meeting with the family of a young guy that when he lost his fight before he was 10 years old to cancer, His mom and dad formed the Super Sam Foundation to encourage other families and to encourage research, and they were there with his sister representing the Super Sam Foundation. The Thompson Center for Autism and Neurological Research at the University of Missouri, another place we're looking to see what we can do to determine early and then help solve problems. The new chancellor at the university, Hank Foley, was with me there, as was the director of that center, Dr. Stephen Cowan, and they're doing good stuff and will continue to. In Kansas City, I was at a private company, MRI Global, that with cancer, with environmental research, is making a big difference, and the head of their company, Dr. Thomas Sack was there as we talked through what they were doing and what they would hope to do. My hometown, Springfield, also the home location of the Alzheimer's Association, the Missouri chapter, another chance to talk about the 3 reasons this matters that I just mentioned here today, but also to meet with people from the Alzheimer's Association, the American Cancer Society, the American Diabetes Association, and then on to Southeast Missouri State University, where again at another autism center, trying to figure out how we can deal with this, detect it earlier, find new and effective ways to do it, and that's what they're also talking about doing at Truman State University in Kirksville. So, you know, it's to see the efforts of researchers, to see and hear stories about how frustrated young researchers have been and how just a 6.6% increase, but remember that's the first increase in 12 years. And during that 12 years, the buying power of the research dollar went down by about 20%. So we restored a little of that 20% in the effort to do at the government level. And you know, the federal government's been involved in research at least since the founding of the Department of Agriculture in 1862. And whether it's healthcare research or ag research or environmental research or energy research, there is a level of that research that should and will be done by the private sector, but there's another level of research that is most benefited by everybody being able to share fairly in the results of that research. And in mental health, a lot of excitement in Missouri and around the country of the potential to be one of the pilot states in excellence in mental health that would combine, as Senator Stabenow from Michigan and I envisioned when we introduced excellence in mental health a few years ago, that would combine treating behavioral health, treating mental health just like all other health. Another way that money is saved, because if that mental health situation, and by the way, the National Institute of Health says that 1 out of 4 adult Americans has a diagnosable and almost always treatable mental health issue. If that mental health issue is being treated, whatever your other health issues are likely to be treated in a much more effective way. And looking for more choices to deal with that, the kind of thing that from Vietnam veterans and to our youngest veterans, a lot more interest in more options, more choices, and mental health issues being dealt with like all other issues. 8 states are going to be doing that. 24 states have applied, and Senator Stabenow and I are going to be talking more about what happens and what we might do to encourage those other 16 states. And the president says he wants to spend more money in mental health. I hope that everybody understands that if you don't have a place to go, it really doesn't matter whether how you share the information about what your mental health provider last told you, or how many mental health providers you have if there's no place to go, and access points and treating behavioral health like all other health is what excellence in mental health did. And let me close with one final area. I think there's a lot of response to understanding, addressing the opioid epidemic, the drug issue, deaths from prescription drugs, from prescription opioids, pain-relieving drugs, quadrupled between 1999 and 2013, claiming more than 145,000 lives over the past 10 years, but a substantial portion of those lives just over the last couple of years. These overdoses cost the economy an estimated $20 billion in medical costs and lost work productivity. Some people die from overdosing. Many other people have to be treated in healthcare, and just the personal loss of becoming addicted to prescription drugs. Our veterans, I mentioned the Missouri General Assembly when I had the chance to talk to them last week. Our veterans are often the victims of this because of the serious injuries that they sustain and the pain-killing drugs they're given to help deal with the pain of those injuries. But then this leads to an addiction to that drug and others. Approximately 3 of 4 new heroin users abuse prescription drugs before switching to heroin. We made a new commitment to this, programs that were targeted to combat opioid abuse at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and Substance Abuse and the Mental Health Services Administration, almost 3 times the investment that the country made before. But this is truly becoming an epidemic, and we need to deal with that epidemic sooner rather than later. Many of our members in their states have talked effectively about fighting heroin, fighting drug addiction, but also the transition from drugs that you were prescribed to have to drugs that you shouldn't have. We're looking at new opportunities there. The Senate has stepped out, the new Republican-led Senate, to deal with those opportunities in new ways. I hope that we haven't made those successes for the spending year we're in now a one-time only event, but a new commitment to try to solve problems early so that the society and the programs that taxpayers fund aren't overwhelmed by those problems later. And I would, Mr. President, yield the floor.